What's going on, YouTube peeps and barbecue freaks? Thank you guys for tuning in. It is Super Bowl Sunday, so you know we're firing up the pit. Today, I'm actually going to smoke a brisket, some ribs, some beef ribs, and some spare ribs. Now, this video, I've had a few people ask me about trimming a brisket, and so in this video, I'm going to focus more on the trimming part of the brisket, not necessarily the entire cook. Now, I will touch on part of the cook. Or touch on the cook throughout the cook, but I really want to focus on the trimming part of it and how I trim it when I'm trimming a brisket for the house or outside of competition. If I was trimming a brisket for a competition, I would definitely trim it completely different. In fact, I think I'm going to do a video of how I trim competition briskets. But this one is just for a brisket you're making around the house, or for a party or something. Kind of the basics. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through that and how I do it. Again, this is just my way. The ribs, I'm not going to show a whole lot on the ribs because it is the exact same rib recipe I made in my last rib video. So if you want to see how those are made, just take a look at that. In fact, I'll put a link to that video down in the description box. Anyway, we're going to hop in the Wayback Time Machine and pick up on me trimming the brisket. So, you ready? Let's get started. Alright, so here I got a just over 14-pound brisket. Now, there's two parts of the brisket. You have the flat, which is this area here, and you have the point. This is all your fat. This is going to be more moist than compared to the flat. So your burn ends come from. You can actually separate it too. There's a layer of fat right in between the where the flat and the point hook up. But we're not going to separate it. We're going to leave it whole. Now, some of this fat I want to leave on, but some of it we're going to take off because it will not render. This here, this hard fat, you definitely want to take that off. This is fat that will not render out. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. And as you start to just kind of slice away from where the fat meets the meat, it should just fall right back, kind of lay down as you trim. And see this kind of just falling right off. Again, this fat isn't going to melt at all, or it isn't going to render at all. So you definitely do not want to leave that on there. All right, so we got a bag over here to put this fat in. See this fat here, there's a layer of fat underneath there that holds these two together. You're going to have some dead skin here or some skin that's discolored. I'm going to go ahead and there isn't a ton on here, but I'm going to go ahead and cut just a small thin layer off. You also trim the brisket. You want to make it a little more aerodynamic. So, you can see that. That's your fat cap. We're going to trim that just a little bit. I'm not going to trim any more here. This fat right here isn't as hard as the outside was, so we want to leave that. There is fat up on the top here. Let's see, let me turn this around. See if you can see it. Yeah, like this here. I want to take off the silver skin here. I want to take off. So what I'm going to do is just kind of trim some of this away. This skin here, you don't want to leave that on there. Once you put your rub on it and it melts, it's going to rub right off. So I'm going to trim this up just a little bit. Again, we're doing this for a home cook, so I'm not going to get as detailed as I would, but that's what we're going to do with this. All right, so I got that fat from the top kind of trimmed off. Again, if I was at doing a competition, I would definitely go into a little more detail with this. But since it isn't a competition brisket, that's going to work. So that's the side looks like. Now on the point, there is some fat here. Again, this is some of that hard fat that will not render out. Here's some meat that's got some discoloration. We want to get rid of that. So this hard fat we want to cut off, and there's also a little bit of, when we turn it over, we'll be able to see it better, but in fact, let's go ahead and do that now. So if you see this, see how thin the fat cap is here, and then up here how it gets really thick. We're going to trim this part here to match the thickness of this area here. So we're going to take the knife and kind of trim it off some. You want to be careful not to take too much off though. We definitely want to leave enough fat to let it render out as it cooks. We'll trim a little more up here. See, now the thickness here, it might look a little wider, but because it slopes down, but it's pretty much even. It doesn't have to be exact, but you get the point. So we're going to trim off a little bit of this fat up here also. Again, we want to try to make it as narrow, as aerodynamic as we can while we trim it. So a lot of people will leave this fat on and then cut it off at the end. You know, I reckon you could do that, but what you're going to end up with is a big old chunk after you cut that fat off, a big old piece of meat underneath that fat that has no seasoning on it whatsoever. And I want to get as much rub, as much flavor on as much meat of the as much of the meat as possible. So I'm definitely trimming it before. I'm going to trim this up a little bit more, but I'll come back to that in just a second. Now this this point, I want to get rid of that. And then this meat that's just kind of hanging off, I'm going to go ahead and cut off because it's going to burn right off. Here's that hard fat. We definitely want to get rid of that. Again, that's not fat that's going to render. But you want to be careful because you want to leave some of that fat on that point. So as you start to trim the top off, it does get a little softer underneath, and that's when you want to go ahead and stop. You want to leave some of that fat on there. You know, and if you accidentally take off a little too much, it's not the end of the world. It'll be all right. This here is still a little, let's see that. still a little hard, so I'm going to take a little bit more off. And I'm actually trying to round this off a little bit as I'm trimming the fat, to kind of stay with the shape of the point. Get rid of that. This fat here is not as hard. I'm going to go ahead and leave that. Now here, on this side, you got a lot of fat here also. You want to make sure you get some of that off. You don't want to take it all off, but it's that stringy kind of fat. I don't want it on there, so I'm going to take it off. But you do got to be careful, because again, this is just like a really thin layer, so you don't want to go too deep on this end, or else you'll definitely cut too much into the meat. But this fat, it isn't hard fat, but I want to go ahead and remove a little bit of it. Some of it will melt away as it cooks, but there's so much of it that it doesn't always all render out. So we're going to help it out a little bit and just get rid of a little bit of it. And you know, the more you do, the better you get, better idea you get of exactly just how much to take off. So I think that's going to be good. There is a little bit here. Let me fix this. There is a little bit here that I want to take off, because we want this side the fat to be the same thickness as the other side. So again, the more you do, the more practice you get. And what I'm saying tends to make more sense. Many of you already know this. Yeah, that's good. Now what I am going to do, because while this side of the brisket, you know, was straight down, the other side over here is kind of rounded off. I don't like that, so I'm just gonna, we're gonna do this. We're gonna make a straight cut all the way down from one end to the other. There you go. It's a good piece of meat. And that is it. Now what I will do, one last thing before we rub it or start cooking it, the grain goes this way. Now once it cooks and it gets that bark on there, it's hard to see that. So I'm going to go ahead and take a cut from this end here, and I'm cutting against the grain. We're going to sacrifice that. And this got some nice little marbling in there. You see that? Now I know once it's cut, this is where I'm going to start cutting, and I know I'm going against the grain. So that is it. Pretty simple trim. And we're going to get this bad boy ready for the pit. Now, I really wanted to focus more on the trimming than the cook itself. That can tend to be a little boring. So I'm going to get it rubbed down, and I will pick back up once I do that. we'll get it on the smoker. Once it's on the smoker, I probably won't show a whole lot until it's time to wrap or it comes off the smoker. So that's what it looks like. All right, so at this point, I've already rubbed the brisket and put it on the pit. It's been going for about 7 hours. I left a lot of this out, the filming, because I didn't want to make this video too long. But this is what it looks like at 7 hours in. And I've been using hickory for my wood, so it's about time to wrap. So I'm gonna bring this inside. I'm just gonna wrap it in some foil, put it back out on the pit, and let it get up to about 198, 200 degrees, and then it'll be done. All right, so let's kind of do a little recap of this brisket cook. I took a 14-pound, slightly over 14-pound brisket. You saw how I trimmed it up. Rubbed it down, threw it on the pit. I really just wanted to focus more on the trim part in this video and not so much the cook. But if you're going to cook a brisket, well, when I cook a brisket, you can either go low and slow or you can go hot and fast. I'm a low and slow kind of guy, so I cook my briskets between 225 and 250, 225 degrees, 250 degrees. I try to keep the range in there. A little closer to 240 actually is where I will keep it most of the time. But anywhere in that from 225 to 250 and you're good. Doing that, this 14-pounder took me, I guess on average they say like an hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes per pound. So depending on the brisket, I will tell you that while you can use that as a guideline if you like, the meat's gonna be ready when it's ready. So I usually will smoke them for about 15 hours, but you can definitely do them in a lot less time than that. So, I think mine went, I think earlier I said 10 hours maybe. So, you can get them done quicker the higher the temperature. Hot and fast at 275 to 325 range, you'll definitely knock off a few hours on your cook time. However, you have to be careful not to dry out the brisket. So that's why I like doing it low and slow. I don't worry a whole lot about drying it out, but once it gets to about 200 degrees, and depending on who you ask, it's really like give or take 3 to 5 degrees, 195, 197 to 203, 205, somewhere in that range, and that's when it's done. I went the first 7 hours, and if you're smoking it, the first few hours, probably 5 or 6 hours, is when you're going to get your smoke. Now, after that, it's not going to take on any more smoke. That's when you want to wrap it with some foil or butcher paper and prevent that smoke from, it won't accept any more smoke, but it will continue to take on that smoke on the outside, and you start to get that soot that you don't want. So when you wrap it, what it does is it protects it from the smoke, too much smoke getting on it, but it also keeps that moisture inside, and it speeds up the cooking process a little more. And that usually, some people will wrap once it gets to about 150, 160. That's when, when they'll start wrapping. I like to wrap once it gets to, once the bark gets to the color I like. Once the bark looks nice and I'm happy with the way the bark looks, then I'll wrap. Sometimes, I'll hit about 160 and the bark isn't where I want it, and I'll continue to let it go unwrapped until that bark gets where gets to a point that I'm happy with. So you're just gonna kind of have to play around with it and find out what works best for you, what you're okay with. But that's how I do it. Now the brisket has been wrapped, it's resting. I'm taking it to a Super Bowl party. I'll cut it up there. I'll try to get some footage and pictures of that. But that's it. I mean, you saw how I trimmed it. Rubbed it down. When I rubbed it down, I used a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. I think that goes good with beef. I will tell you, I never use oil, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, any oil of any kind on beef. There's a lot of fat in there. Some people will use that to help that rub stick. Some people use mustard or another binder. I don't use the oil. That oil, once that fat starts to render out, this is just my thinking process, that oil will just kind of run right off. Now, when you put that oil, what's on top of that oil? Your rub. So when that oil runs off, your rub is running off. So I don't use oil. To me, it just doesn't make sense. You can use mustard if you inject it. The juice from the injection makes a good binder. You can use mustard. And if you're someone that uses oil, that's fine. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying this is why I don't do it. So that's my brisket cook. Again, I'll try to add some extra footage in here once we get to the party, and if not, at least some pictures. And I'll include some pictures of the ribs. I did some spare ribs and some little beef finger ribs. So I'll include that, picture of those at the end of this video. Anyway, I hope you guys found this helpful. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, or any questions at all, just leave them down in the comment section and I will get back to you. So I hope this video isn't too long. I try to really keep it as short as possible. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't, hit that like button. I truly appreciate it. Even more, I'd appreciate you hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much. I will see you guys soon. Take care.